the Progressive MS webinar series. My name is Robert Joyce, and today we have Dr. Conor Kerley with us, who is a dietitian. And thank you very much for coming, Conor.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Really look forward to an interesting discussion, and always happy to help out the MS community.
Thank you. It's very much appreciated. Now, I'm just going to give a little bit of a biography for Conor. In 2003, and after 3 major relapses in only 8 months, Conor was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 15. Up to that point, Conor was a healthy athlete and student. Inspired by his own circumstances, Conor went on to receive his degree in human nutrition and dietetics from Trinity College in 2010. He commenced nutritional research studies at Conley Hospital and the National Children's Hospital and earned his doctorate from the School of Medicine and Medical Sciences at University College Dublin. His research has been published in international peer-reviewed medical journals and has attracted over €210,000 in research funding to date. Wow, Conor, that is just impressive. And to add on to this, I have to say, I heard yesterday that your company has been awarded the World Food Innovation Award. So congratulations, Conor.
Thanks for that introduction. A wee bit embarrassed now.
And also, you've been a bit through the wars over the last couple of days, so which are different medical issues, nothing MS related. So thank you very much for making it. So diet is a huge issue, I think, for people with any illness. It's not just associated with multiple sclerosis or progressive MS. But when I was talking a month ago with Dr. Jonathan Egan, we were actually discussing diet and the impact of diet perhaps on your mental health, but also on ways that it can help make you healthier and help you combat your illness in maybe a more strong way. Can you tell me anything about diet? What is happening with diet and multiple sclerosis? Are there things that we should know?
Yeah, a very broad question to start off. So I guess, you mentioned that diet is important for lots of things. And yes, it absolutely is. And probably some of the best evidence we have is that diet is probably one of the most important things that we can do to influence our health, our longevity, in other words, how long we live, and also our risk of disease and the risk of that disease, being severe. And that's true of things like cardiovascular disease, like cancers, like diabetes, and so on. And there is more and more emerging and consistent evidence regarding MS specifically. In terms of is there anything new, there isn't a huge amount of new research because of, I guess, the pandemic really. But up until then, there was some kind of interesting work going on, looking at things like fasting and calorie restriction, also looking at ketogenic diets, and also looking at individual nutrient supplementation, such as certain types of fatty acids. Omega-3 spring to mind, vitamin D springs to mind as well. So a really complicated field. But as I always say whenever I give lectures publicly, like people with MS like myself, of course, we also have a heart and we also have a risk of diabetes and blood pressure and, bone disorders. So even though the evidence for MS and diet is not absolutely gold standard, there is good evidence, and also we should eat healthily to look after everything else. Never mind our mental function, our physical function, our fatigue, which we all know is heavily influenced by diet.
So over the years now, I've been diagnosed nearly 30 years. I have tried many, many diets. And the first one that I tried way back 29 years ago was the SWANK diet, which is basically a low-fat, heart-healthy diet, as far as I'm concerned, very low in processed foods. I thought it was very simple in that it said, anything that comes in a geometric shape, like a square or a rectangle, just don't eat that and eat all the other stuff. Since then, you have the OMS diet, you have ketogenic, you have paleo, you have the Walls diet. They're really notching up more and more. And even recently, I noticed that Gavin Giovannini was saying that there could be evidence with the ketogenic diet. Now, I've tried a lot of these. They're really tough, Conor, to keep with. What is your opinion of all these different diets?
Yeah, again, like behavior change is very difficult, as we know, but it can be done. And dietary change is very difficult because we're bombarded, 24/7 with, foods to eat, whether it be on our mobile phones, whether it be on the TV, whether we're just walking down the street and we see advertisements or in the supermarket. So, dietary change is definitely very difficult, but it can be worthwhile. I guess if we maybe take a step back and talk about what those diets are. So the swank diet really, by definition, is a low-fat diet, but particularly a low-saturated fat diet. And we think about a saturated fat. So saturated fats are fats which are hard at room temperature. That's the easiest way to think about them. So you think about butter, you think about the fat on a pork chop, they're saturates. Whereas something like olive oil, which is liquid at room temperature, that's not saturated. So essentially, a swank diet is one which is very low in high saturated fat products. So very low in meat, very low in dairy. And from there, then the only other really strong recommendation that Swank had was that it would be high in unsaturated fats. So in other words, things like fish, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and so on. And from there, then I guess there wasn't a huge amount of guidance. And the Swank diet has morphed over time. And that's the way science and history goes. Things get updated. But essentially, the Swank diet is based on research actually from Norway in the 1930s, in between World War One and Two, and then actually a large study that Swank himself did in Canada, where he got 150 patients and asked them to stick to the diet, and about half did and half didn't, and the half that did really well, and the half that didn't do so well. But medicine and science has progressed a lot, and that's kind of study design is a little bit old-fashioned now, and that's why a lot of neurologists will dismiss this diet. With this one,
it's strange that something that had been shown to be effective now is not used. What has changed in the meantime? That is it the disease modifying therapies? Is that what ruled it out?
So I guess if we think back to the 1930s, originally what happened was Swank studied the inland area of Norway, where they had a lot of dairy, a lot of beef, because they were farmers. And then he studied also the coastal region, where they had a lot less beef and dairy, but a lot more fish and vegetables. And he saw massive differences in rates of MS. And he thought it was got to do with diet. Now, that's almost 100 years ago, and everybody thought that Swank was crazy. They thought he was literally a madman. Diet has something got to do with MS, a brain disease, an autoimmune disease. You're crazy, and they didn't really listen. But he persevered and went on. I guess the problem is what we look for now in science is what we call a control group. So in other words, some people do one type of diet and some people do another type of diet, and then we compare them before and after. That type of research wasn't so common back in the 1930s and 40s when Swank was doing his research. But I guess what's really interesting is that, the people who didn't stick to his diet had much more rates of, being in a wheelchair and perhaps being dead and so on. And there was no medicines for MS at the time, so that didn't complicate it at all. As time's gone on, it would be really interesting to repeat that study. But as we always say, somebody's got to pay for that research, and I'm not sure who's willing to do that.
Another area that has been of interest, certainly in the diet aspect, is people have talked about anti-inflammatory stuff. So multiple sclerosis, as we know, is some kind of inflammation that is in the system. And that inflammation is causing these scars, this scleroma that's on your nerves. Are there foods that we can eat or even supplements that we can take that can help reduce this inflammation within our systems?
So again, it's quite a complicated question, simply because as scientists, we like to measure things. So can I measure myself right now, and can I eat something and change my inflammation level? And that sounds relatively easy to do. The problem is, if I measure myself right now, I know my inflammation is very low. Even though I've got MS and also I've got asthma, my inflammation will be very low. That's because the inflammation isn't in my blood, it's in my brain and spinal cord. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but I will answer it. So when we think, there's some nutrients which we can say are definitely seen to be anti-inflammatory, and they would include things like fiber. So as I always say, fiber, the golden rule of fiber, dietary fiber, is it's only found in plant foods. So I often tell my patients that fiber is akin to a skeleton. So plants don't have a skeleton, So instead of a skeleton, the structure that keeps them, a plant upright is that fiber, and then
Mhm.
humans can eat that plant. So if I ask somebody, is there any fiber in chicken? No, because it's not a plant, right? What about if it's skinless chicken breast that's organically fed? No, there's absolutely no fiber in any animal product. On the flip side, whole plant foods you're looking for. So think of fruits, think of vegetables, think of whole grains like oats, like brown rice, like wholemeal spaghetti. Think about legumes like chickpeas, lentils, kidney beans, and nuts and seeds. They're your major sources of fiber. In addition, if we think about other plant foods, for example, a croissant made with sugar, flour, very, very low fiber. And so it's not all plants, and some plants are higher than others. But fiber, absolutely very good. The second food or nutrient I would recommend for inflammation then would be omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-3s, we could talk all day, all week maybe about fatty acids and omega-3s, but we're looking for a balance of different types of fatty acids. So omega-3s are ones which we don't really consume enough of, and then we have omega-6, which we consume way too much of. And that's known to be what we call pro-inflammatory. So of course, the key question is, how can we get them more into balance? And what foods contain these nutrients. So we get omega-3s mostly from oily fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, things like that. Unfortunately, not so much in things like whiting and cod. So it's got to be the oily fish. And then if someone doesn't like fish or doesn't eat fish, then we're talking about flax seeds, linseeds, walnuts, and then green vegetables as well. There will be major sources as well as supplements. Sorry, Robert, have you got a question?
No, no, I just, the way you're describing that, it sounds like paleo to me.
Yeah, so paleo is again the basis of kind of the autoimmune protocols diet and also the Walls diet. And it's kind of like we should eat like our Paleolithic ancestors and so on. So the key thing about a paleo diet is it encourages animal foods. So you think of your meats, you think of your fish. It also encourages lots of fruits and vegetables. And then it really discourages dairy, grains, and legumes. So we've just said grains and legumes seem to be pretty important, but definitely fruits and vegetables and probably oily fish seem to be very important as well. And then also a paleo diet recommends limiting dairy or eliminating dairy as well as sugar. So there's definitely elements of pretty much all dietary dietary patterns which are definitely beneficial. But would paleo be the best? I mean, I disagree that legumes are unhealthy. I disagree that whole grains are unhealthy. And I don't know if we should be eating huge amounts of meat every day.
When I was doing research on this years ago, when I was trying to sort out my own MS and see what I could do, I've tried a series of these. I've tried the autoimmune protocol. I've tried the paleo. I did find them very difficult. But one person that I read, which I thought was very interesting, was Michael Pollan. Now, he's not a dietitian. He's got no qualifications. He's a journalist, and he wrote a book called Food.
Yeah.
But he had 7 words that he thought were just pivotal.
Yeah.
He said, eat food,
Mostly.
not too much, and mostly plants. What do you think of his approach?
Yeah, I'm delighted you brought up that quote because I read the book. I read his first book as well, which is called The Omnivore's Dilemma. I think he writes very nicely, and I think it's a really intelligent quote. And oftentimes I can be heard saying it at my lectures and say it kind of humbles me that I've spent 10 years of my professional life studying nutrition, that a journalist comes up with this phenomenal quote, which I think is going to be really, really hard to top. But if you actually think about it, what he's saying is eat food. So in other words, don't eat fake Frankenstein foods. So, eat real foods that we know what they are, what's in them. So that's a really good place to start. Number 2, not too much. So in other words, it's probably not healthy to eat a kilo of broccoli every day. No matter how healthy the food is, we shouldn't gorge on food. So eat food, but not too much. Just enjoy your food and eat enough. And then mostly plants. I mean, again, we've talked about plants being the only source of fiber, being the major source of antioxidants, being the major source of dietary potassium, being the major source of lots of different nutrients. And I think, that really does stack up. So, although there's lots of disagreement in the diet world in general and the MS diet world, pretty much everyone agrees fruit, good, vegetables, good, nuts, good, seeds, good, Legumes are a little bit controversial, but I would put them in the good category. And then grains, again, a little bit controversial. I would put them in the good category. And they're all our plants, right? So if you include more of those, you're probably doing well, whether you've got MS or not.
And what is your opinion about dairy in general?
Yeah, so really controversial question. I guess we're taught that dairy is really important because it provides a lot of essential nutrients, and this is definitely true. It provides a lot of protein and particularly calcium. We've all heard about dairy providing calcium. Now, that's fine, but there are other sources of both protein and calcium, which of course are very important, is very important for our bone health, but for other things as well. My issue is that if somebody doesn't want to consume dairy for whatever reason, that's fine, as long as they consume enough of calcium, particularly, and that's very doable in today's world. Me personally, I don't really consume any dairy products, for a variety of reasons. But number one, because they contain quite a lot of saturated fat. And number two, there is actually some kind of preliminary research, which isn't quite high level yet, that a type of protein found in dairy can be harmful. So that means even low-fat dairy will still contain this protein. So what I would just recommend, anybody who's thinking about limiting dairy or not consuming dairy, I don't have a problem with that as a dietitian, as long as they consume enough calcium. And then, of course, the question is how am I going to do that? Well, really good source of calcium are actually green vegetables again. So we can see greens are popping up everywhere. So eat your greens. Popeye was right, except for one thing Popeye was wrong about. There's lots of calcium in spinach, but we can't absorb it very well. But if we think about calcium in broccoli and kale and different and cabbage and so on, we can actually absorb those much higher than we can from dairy products. Other good sources of calcium then that aren't dairy would be things like the bones in certain types of fish, like sardines, and of course things like sesame seeds, certain dried fruits, oranges, and then any of the dairy alternatives like soy milk, or generally have calcium added in. And a little tip for anybody listening: they add in the calcium, and then it's like a powder, and it kind of sediments to the bottom. So just shake the carton, and then pour it into your cereal or into your glass or into your smoothie, whatever. And then a very highly absorbable calcium form that's very cheap and very healthy.
One of the issues that I've noticed during the pandemic, which is a little bit different to normal circumstances, is the amount of fresh vegetables that are available is much more limited. And so we're relying on frozen vegetables or canned vegetables. Is there any difference between frozen, canned, or fresh? Am I chasing down a kind of a rabbit hole of, internet paranoia?
There is a difference, and it's a really good question. And it's a really common question. So in general, we would say fresh is best, but I'm here in Ireland like yourself, Robert. We can't grow all the fruits and vegetables we need. So they're going to be imported into Ireland, and they might be picked in New Zealand and shipped to Ireland and kept fresh, maybe artificially. And by the time they reach us, they're fresh, but they've been picked, maybe 2 months ago or maybe more. All the while maybe losing nutrients during that sea journey. So fresh is probably one of the best options. Frozen, I would say, is a very, very close second. And the reason why is generally when something is frozen, it's picked and frozen very quickly to maintain as much of its, I guess, being honest, the manufacturers don't really care so much about the nutrition. They want it to be as flavorful and as appetizing as possible. So if they let it rot and then they freeze it, no one's going to buy it, right? So they freeze it when it's very fresh, and then the freezing locks in a lot of goodness. And there are some nutrients which can actually be decreased by freezing, but in general, the vast majority, I would say 90-95%, are going to be maintained very well by freezing. So fresh and then frozen being a very close second. And as we know, frozen is often a very convenient way, very economical way, much cheaper. Especially things like berries can be much cheaper to buy frozen. I know in my local supermarket, I can buy like a ready-made stir fry. All I need to do is put in the wok with a sauce. That's really convenient when I'm working hard all day, as I'm sure, or I'm just tired, like I'm sure a lot of listeners can empathize with.
Thank you for making that clarity, because I remember some time ago, I used to work in the fishing industry. And again, fish is one product that is better actually eaten frozen, because it's usually frozen on the boat as it's caught, and you don't have all this lost nutrients, but also it's fresher than if you buy it in the supermarket fresh, right? But it's been sitting around for weeks, maybe. So I like the fact that we can actually change over to frozen. But you did say that there are certain nutrients that are lost in freezing. What type of nutrients are we losing?
So it's some nutrients which you wouldn't really be too familiar with. They're not necessarily general vitamins and minerals. One thing I should say that most fruits and vegetables to be frozen are actually blanched very quickly. And if we actually think, without getting too deep into the science, if you think about a cell wall which is full of water, when they freeze that, what happens with water? It expands, cracking that cell wall, and generally, the food won't be so tasty if it's not blanched first. So most fruits and vegetables are actually blanched very quickly and then frozen. And that process of blanching can lead to a little loss of nutrients, and then the freezing process as well. But as I say, it's relatively minor. And for me, as somebody who was a student for over 10 years, I'm all about convenience and economics. So if someone, is saying, well, Conor, I can't afford fresh fruits and vegetables all day, every day, that's absolutely fine. Stick with frozen. Frozen will be much healthier than canned, I should say, as well.
And what about these dried foods that you can get? Particularly, I'm thinking of, and I've used this myself quite often, dried celery and carrot and that type of stuff for making stocks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that probably comes in flakes or powders, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, generally, the powdering process, there's different ways we can powder things, or we can turn it into flakes. But generally, you're going to maintain a lot of the goodness by that process. Again, maybe not quite 100%, but it's really interesting. Like we see some people say, okay, raw is better, so I'm going to just eat raw vegetables or whatever and become just a raw foodist or something like that. But there's other nutrients which are actually increased by cooking. So when we talk about foods, I wouldn't say cook everything. I wouldn't say eat everything raw. I would say do a little bit of both. And then as we come into summer in Ireland, hopefully, we might decide to consume more raw or lightly cooked foods. When it's deep in winter, we might consume more, heavily cooked foods, and that's fine. But I would always say, like, kind of diversity in the types of foods, and then in the types of cooking we do, or the types of consuming, whether it be cooked or raw, is a really good strategy as well.
Okay, I just want to take a slight little break here. If Aoife can throw up the first poll, we'd like to find out where you're from, what type of MS you have. So we're going to leave that up for maybe 5 minutes or so, just to see what people are like, and then we'll have a second poll later on. One of the things that I was interested in is the use of food to deal with some of the stressors that happen within our lives with MS. So we suffered from things like fatigue, mobility issues, fitness, concentration problems, and all of these things are inherently because of our MS. But are there things that we can eat to help us with this? So for example, I would have coffee for breakfast in the morning, so that helps me with my fatigue. Are there any other things like that that we can incorporate into our daily routine that will help to boost us?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really appropriate question. One thing I would do, maybe slightly getting off topic, is just say, so diet, we know it's really important, but, it's not like we should just eat healthily and not do anything else. So things like physical activity or sleep, our medication, if we're on medication, also our stress patterns, etc., our attitude, they're all really, really important as well. And for example, I saw some research done recently showing that physical activity was actually associated and led to less fatigue. So it sounds crazy. Now, it doesn't mean that if you go for a big long walk or a big run that you're not going to be tired, but it just means over time that more physical activity, or, like kind of a healthy level of physical activity, was associated with less fatigue. And of course, that can mean, a swim, a walk. It doesn't have to be running a marathon. It can be, whatever somebody wants, whatever somebody enjoys. And I think that's really important too. When it comes to diet, so In terms of fatigue, there are some nutrients which we know are really important for general energy and fatigue. And you mentioned there coffee, so obviously being a major source of caffeine. The good news for everybody, because some people think I'm the guy who brings bad news, the good news is that, you know, coffee seems to be really absolutely okay, and perhaps even beneficial for overall health as well as for MS. So if anybody likes their coffee, you know, I'm not gonna knock that one out. Tea as well is absolutely fantastic, including white tea, or sorry, green tea and black tea. I just wouldn't have, you know, 10 donuts with it. On top of that, then, so some nutrients we know, vitamin B12, absolutely essential for our energy levels. And that becomes really important if anybody's following, for example, the OMS, or the Overcoming MS diet, where a lot of the animal foods are reduced. Now, you will find vitamin B12 in fish. So as long as somebody's consuming fish, that's fine. It's a very simple blood test to get done. Other sources of vitamin B12 include meats and dairy. It's very difficult to get from plant foods, plant source foods, but you can get it very easily from you know, a very cheap supplement. The last thing I would just say about vitamin B12 is one of the issues is that it's really difficult to absorb. Now, most people don't have a problem, but if somebody doesn't absorb vitamin B12, it doesn't matter how much fish or meat that they consume, they're probably going to need an injection. And some of my patients literally crawl in the door, get an injection, and run out the door. And their energy is so instantaneously improved. And the last one I'll just touch on very quick. Well, two more I'll just touch on very quickly for energy are iron. So iron is what we would call kind of a double-edged sword. So too much iron is bad. And I always say to my patients, imagine like kind of a rusty nail. So the iron on the nail is rusting because the oxygen is damaging it. And obviously there's a lot of oxygen inside the human body. So too much iron is not good. On the flip side, too little iron is not good. And that's important again if somebody eats a diet low in iron, or perhaps loses a lot of iron, for example, in ladies. And that can be an issue where they may need to look at upping their iron sources. So good sources of iron that perhaps are really help promoting will be, again, coming back to the greens and the beans, greens and beans. So our chickpeas or lentils or kidney beans. Of course, we can get iron in red meats and so on, but they're one of the issues that we can actually overabsorb that type of iron, whereas we're never going to overabsorb it from beans and greens. So I'm not saying don't eat red meat, but I'm just saying I wouldn't overconsume it. I wouldn't depend on it completely. And then the last one I'll just touch on very quickly in terms of our energy is magnesium. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard of magnesium. It's a really interesting nutrient because of its role in energy, but also in terms of its role in reactions within the cell, and finally in terms of its role in muscle and muscle relaxation. So if anybody suffers from spasticity or any other issues like that, magnesium can be a really important one. We know that the vast majority of adults in the world, and children as well, I should say, do not consume enough magnesium. And that's because you know, we don't eat enough of the foods which contain magnesium. And of course, what are those? So again, we come back to greens and beans, but also nuts are a really good source. We think of, you know, cashew nuts, Brazil nuts, hazelnuts, walnuts, etc. And finally, whole grains, again, really good source of magnesium.
Okay, Aoife, if you could close the poll and we can see what the results of that are. The vegetables seem to be a big key for you. Anyway, I'm just going back to the results of this poll, just seeing how we are. 21% have primary progressive, 23% have secondary progressive, and 45% have relapsing remitting. And there's a few other family and friends coming. As far as visitors coming, the vast majority are from Leinster, nearly 50%, but we do have some from the United States, the UK, and outside of those areas, which is very interesting. The age profile that we have no younger people, which is a pity, because I think that diet is one of the things that you can start doing early in your life, and not just for MS, but for general health, to have the right diet is good. 25% between 21 and 45, nearly 50% between 46 and 60, and then 27% over 60. Interesting to see the older profile. Are there things that we need to change in our diet based on the type of MS that we have or the age that we have?
So probably not so much regarding age and MS, but regarding age and general health. One thing I would say is protein becomes quite important. I don't know about any of our visitors from overseas, but in Ireland, what we tend to do is have a low protein breakfast. Our cornflakes, a low protein cereal, and then lunch might be soup and maybe a piece of bread. So again, quite low in protein. And then dinner, we might have like a piece of meat with our potatoes and vegetables, for example. So you have low protein at breakfast, low at dinner, at midday, and then a lot at dinner. Where really what we need to do is have it at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, spread out throughout the day. So you think in the morning you might have like peanut butter, you might have some soy milk, you might have whatever you like. You might have some baked beans. Similarly for lunch, you need to include more protein in there. So spread it out throughout the day. And that becomes really important for your bone health and for your muscles, particularly as you age. What seems to be really important as you age as well is vitamin B12, we'll come back to. And that's because the acidity in our stomach can oftentimes decrease, and this can mean that the B12 isn't absorbed so much. I say it's a very simple blood test for anybody to find out if it is an issue that's contributing to your fatigue, for example, or your mental function. And then it's very easy to fix, whether it be with a supplement, changing your diet, or an injection. And then in terms of the type of MS, so there is interesting evidence, and I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail, that the different types of MS have a lot more in common than originally thought. But in terms of nutrition and different types of MS, there's very little evidence for nutrition and MS full stop compared to the amount that there is on other types of on physical activity, for example, or on medications. The evidence that is there is very positive, is very encouraging, but it's not quite at the level that we would like to see it at. But in terms of progressive MS, the evidence is really lacking. And again, anybody who's familiar with the progressive MS literature will know that that's kind of common across the different types of research, that, most of the research is done in relapsing MS, unfortunately. But in preparing for today, I was very interested to find a study from 2016 done in Italy, where they actually included people with relapsing MS, but also progressive MS. And it was done looking specifically at nutrition. And what they found was that the diet worked, and it worked in everybody, decreasing inflammation levels markedly. And of course, what was the diet? It was basically a semi-vegetarian diet, which was low in calories. So, they put people on a calorie-controlled diet. They weren't eating too much. And then it also had supplements of vitamin D and omega-3. So again, kind of consistent with what we've said along, what Michael Pollan said. So eat food, but not too much. So restrict your calories, or, eat enough calories. And also, mostly plants. So that semi-vegetarian diet, high in vegetables, fruits, and so on. And then we come back to vitamin D and omega-3.
So Aoife, if you could put up the second poll, because this will be even more interesting, because we're asking people what type of diets you have. One question that has come in is a question about sweet potato. Now, I recently discovered sweet potato maybe about a year ago, and I just think it's a wonderful food. I love it. And I bake it, I cover it in olive oil, salt and pepper, a few spices, and bang it in the oven for 40 minutes, and it is just, I love it, and I've become a little bit addicted. And I have that with baked salmon and say steamed asparagus, and that's a lovely dinner. It's quite simple to make. So if people could answer that poll, we keep that up for maybe about 5 minutes. What is your opinion of sweet potato?
Excellent, simple. Sweet potato is excellent. As I say, also potatoes are very good as well. The problem is if we fry potatoes, if we add a huge amount of butter to them. But an ordinary potato is absolutely fine. Very, very good source of fiber, very good source of potassium. Actually contains some protein as well. So sweet potatoes will have a lot more of beta carotene. As I always say to my patients, beta carotene. So where do we find it? Carrots, and also anything that's orange or yellow, like sweet potato, like pumpkin, and those sort of foods. And beta carotene is a precursor to vitamin A, and there's a huge amount in sweet potatoes actually, but there's lots of other nutrients in there. Plus, as you mentioned, it's absolutely delicious. So sweet potato is delicious. I would say if anybody likes potatoes or spuds or sweet potatoes, absolutely include them. Not to the detriment of other foods, but they're one of the plants, and absolutely very, very healthy food.
So the traditional Irish diet of, spuds, 2 veg, and a bit of meat sounds like it's an ideal diet.
Well, no, yeah, a little bit. If we say like, so again, like the traditional Irish meat and two veg would often have a lot of butter and salt in there as well, with a pint of milk or whatever. So maybe not so good, but absolutely. You know, maybe if anybody can take away anything from today is those 7 words from Michael Pollan, not even from me. So eat food, not too much, mostly plants, and then it's very difficult to go too much wrong.
I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions. I've got somebody here said about a vitamin B spray. Is that effective as compared to the injected? I know I get vitamin B injections maybe once a year, but I have them as supplements as well on a weekly basis. What about the spray? Is that any good?
Yeah, the sprays can be very, very good, and you can often absorb them actually directly in the mouth, which is one of the reasons why they're very effective. So spray very good, unless someone has a particular issue with a tablet or a supplement, or you know, an oral supplement. You know, the oral supplement should be fine. The spray, obviously, then you don't have to swallow anything, but they both should be very good. I see someone as well saying that a GP won't give them an injection. So I would just say stick with the tablets, and maybe you need to just take more. And as well, feel free to contact me, and that goes for anybody in the call. Feel free to contact me with any questions before or after the webinar.
Okay, so if you can just close that poll just to see what the response is, and if there are answers to those questions that people want to highlight a bit more, if you could put it into the chat. So interesting to see that only 30% of people are using a special diet for their MS. The vast majority are not, and some people dance in and out a bit like me. Swank is 5%, Walls 5%, the OMS diet 15%, nobody on the autoimmune, nobody on ketogenic, 6% vegetarian, and we've got 69% saying other. So I'd be really curious to hear in the chats what those other diets are, because I'm not aware of much more than that. Then supplements, 6% don't take any. 76% are taking vitamin D, which is one of these. I'm taking the 4,000 IUs a day of vitamin D. I'm sure you'll have some comment on that. Vitamin B complex is used. Magnesium is used, but only 6% for each of those. Have they discussed nutrition with their neurologist? 37% yes, 63% said no. And then as far as weight, 5% underweight, 48% correct weight, and 47% are overweight. And I think weight actually can be a huge issue for MS, particularly, and I know myself, if I start to put on a few extra kilos, I really feel it. Everything slows down. Cognitively, I'm worse. Fatigue is worse. And the ability just to do stuff dramatically reduces the more weight I'm carrying.
Yeah, absolutely. So weight, we know it's ingrained in us, right? That weight is inherently tied to health. So, you know, I think you mentioned there maybe 5% of people thought they were underweight. So that can be a big issue as well. And there can be multiple reasons for that. And maybe someone has an issue with swallowing. Maybe someone has an issue with food preparation. Maybe they just, you know, are very active and have a fast metabolism. Also, you know, there could be other reasons as well. So I'd advise if anybody is underweight to speak to a health professional, particularly a dietitian. But just remember that nuts and seeds are very good sources of fats. Think about avocados as well, which can be really quite healthy. Think about peanut butter, think about avocado on the side of your dinner and so on, as long as there's no issues with those foods. In terms then of the other end of the spectrum being overweight, so specific to MS, we know that that carrying a lot of excess adipose tissue or fatty tissue can actually increase inflammation throughout the body. And obviously, as an inflammatory disease, we don't want extra inflammation. There's certain types of compounds released by adipose tissue again, or fatty tissue, called adipokines, and some people might have heard of these like leptin and ghrelin. For example, adiponectin as well. So adiponectin is anti-inflammatory. Leptin is pro-inflammatory, and leptin is produced by fatty tissue. So the more fatty tissue you have, the more leptin, the more inflammatory. And that's not what we want. We want the opposite. And if somebody is struggling with their weight and thinks that their food intake contributes significantly, what I would say is, again, have a think about foods which are low in calories. That's those fruits and vegetables again. High in fiber. Again, we talked about fibrous foods again. And then try and stick to your meal time. So lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner, I should say. And, try avoid late night snacking. But again, if anybody is struggling, please feel free to reach out to me or their own healthcare professional. But absolutely, you mentioned yourself, Robert, that when we put on weight, we feel a little bit sluggish. Again, that's the same for everybody, whether they've got MS or not. And similarly, if we think about all the things related to MS, so it's much more difficult to walk, if you're carrying a lot more weight. If somebody did, for example, fall over and they were carrying more weight, they would be much likely to do damage if they were carrying a lot of extra weight and so on. So we have multiple reasons to try and maintain our weight. Not to say that that's an easy thing to do, but it absolutely can be done.
Now, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I just want to go through quickly. One person is asking about protein powders. What do you feel about them?
So in general, I would say avoid them. We don't need them. Again, think back to Michael Pollan's quote again. I think we're going to spend all day talking about Pollan here, but eat food. So foods aren't protein powders. So if you think about some of the protein powders, you have like a soy protein powder. Well, why not have some soy instead? So that can be soybeans, but it can also be soy milk. It can be whatever you like. So for example, what I do in the morning is I have some soy milk with some linseed, with some spinach and berries, and that's my smoothie. And that's quite high in protein, but also omega-3 fatty acids, also fiber, and then we're getting in the two to four portions of fruits and vegetables, and that's before 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's really easy to get your protein if you don't need a protein powder.
If there was one vitamin that you could take, what one would you take? And is there a difference between cheaper and more expensive supplements?
So really difficult question, the first one. So vitamin literally means vital amine. So if you lack any vitamin, you're going to get into serious problems, and that's not going to be good for your health. If there was one nutrient which I would advise, that would be vitamin D. Not because vitamin D is a cure-all, because it's so difficult to get in the diet. So the dietary sources of vitamin D are essentially limited to oily fish. So again, those sardines, mackerel, and salmon. So anything else is not really going to provide enough vitamin D. You've heard there might be some vitamin D in eggs. You're going to have to consume a lot of eggs to get a couple of hundred eggs maybe to get enough. I wouldn't advise that. Aside from that, it's really difficult. But as I say, in Ireland, we're coming into summer pretty soon, hopefully. So I'm going to give you a very simple rule to remember. The best source of vitamin D is sunshine, okay? Moderate sunshine. Like anything, we don't want to overdo it on broccoli. We don't want to overdo it on anything, including exercise. But we also don't want to overdo it on sunshine. So we never want to allow ourselves to burn. And someone like me with Caucasian skin, I'm probably looking for about 15 to 20 minutes of sun with no sunscreen, and I'm exposing skin. This bit here, with my shirt, I can't make vitamin D here, but this bit here, I can. Also, if I'm in the sun for 20 minutes with this bit of skin, and then I turn over to a new bit of skin, the dial resets. So what I generally say is try and do 15 minutes on your stomach, lying out reading a book or something in the back garden, and then flip over for another 10 or 15 minutes, and that's you done for the day. You don't want to burn. And then finally, Kerley's rule is you want your shadow to be shorter than your body. So if your shadow is too long, it means the sun is low in the sky and it's not strong enough. You're not going to make any vitamin D. The sun is really high in the sky, you're making vitamin D. And generally in Ireland, we're going to be talking in around 11 to 2 p.m. Obviously in places like Florida, Morocco, really sunny places, you're probably going to be able to make vitamin D all year round, all day round. But really, no matter where you are in the world, what time of year it is, or what time of day it is, just remember Kerley's rule, short shadow, you're making vitamin D. 20 minutes, more than enough.
Would you believe it? We're 45 minutes into this at this
Already.
stage, Conor. It's like it has flown by. And there's a list of questions here that I really want to ask you even more about. It is such an interesting topic. There is so much more that we can discuss. People asking about things like turmeric. I'm also thinking about cog fog. Is there things that we can do that? We definitely need to have another conversation at another stage, Conor, just to even go into a few more of these things. Just wrapping up, thank you very much. I have to thank the MS Society for making this possible, particularly Aoife Kerwin and Aidan Larkin, who are drivers behind this particular event. coming up in a month's time. The next episode is on the 22nd of April, and we're going to be talking to Dr. Jonathan Egan about how carers can maintain their mental health. So I think it's when we're people with MS, and certainly when you get to the progressive stage, you usually have a carer or a family member. Their mental health is just as important as the person who's got the illness's mental health. And so we're going to talk to Jonathan about that next week. I really am looking forward to that. But Conor, thank you and congratulations. I want to talk about research and what's going on in the future and what you're doing. Can you give us a quick thing on research, if you can give us a bit more information on that, and then we'll have to wrap it up, I think.
Sure. So the one thing I'll say before too many people jump off the call is please feel free to contact me directly, engage with me on social media. I'm on all the platforms from LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so on. And I know if you contact MS Society, they can give you my details as well. Happy to help in any way. In terms of research, so there's research is paused a little bit because of what's happening. An interesting study came out about 2 years ago looking at the type of fatty acid found in olive oil, and it showed that this had a really anti-inflammatory effect on people with MS. So oleic acid, which is found really in olive oil, virgin olive oil, but also in certain types of nuts and seeds. So again, coming back to those foods being pretty healthy, you can see the consistency really is stacking up. In terms of any other research, I'm not aware of anything really exciting that I should fill anybody in on. What I will just say very quickly is this time last year, I was planning my own research, which got cancelled due to COVID. But what I'm really passionate about is MS and helping everybody in the world with MS and also with other brain diseases. And what we're looking at developing is a product, a formula, which can really deliver nutrients directly into the brain and the spinal fluid as well. So very quickly, there's a barrier. If I can just show you roughly here, you'll have to excuse my long locks. Haven't been to the barber in a while. Called the blood-brain barrier, which again, a lot of people will be familiar with on the call. The problem is it stops a lot of nutrients getting into the brain. So when we eat a big salad, a lot of those nutrients will go around the body, but they won't necessarily go into the brain. And the brain can be damaged over time for different reasons. So what I'm developing is a product, a formula, I should say, which can deliver key nutrients directly into the brain and spinal cord. And in theory, that would be very beneficial for MS and other brain diseases. But of course, as a scientist, I need to put that to the test. So I think it's really exciting. And if anybody would like to keep up to date with that, please do, and please contact me. But it's going to be a long road ahead, but hopefully a very fruitful road, if you excuse the pun.
Conor, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward definitely to speaking to you again at some stage. Thank you, everybody who's attended, and I think we'll sign off now. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Take care.